last week was, you could say, chaotic in many, many ways. It was loud, it was dramatic, it launched the Methodist Circuit Riders, and they were fire breathing, and it was a very, we'll say, noisy and loud revival. The antithesis, the polar antithesis of the Cane Ridge Revival is what we're going to talk about tonight. It has been called the 1857 Fulton Street Revival. It's been called the Businessman's Prayer Revival. The Prayer Revival of New York City. Numerous different names. I think they all capture it. So let's go ahead and pick up, because we've got 50 odd years to cover from the Cane Ridge camp meetings to 1857. The impact of the Cane Ridge Revival meetings and the birth of the camp meetings and the circuit riders greatly impacted this young nation. And I think you could very effectively argue that the meetings such as Cane Ridge were some of the most important revivals in American history. And they did lay a foundation for the further revivals. So we're going to move ahead to from 18 years after the Revolutionary War to right before the Civil War, 1857. A lot's changed in America in those 60 years. Because of the extent of the change that had taken place, let's put some historical context into what we're going to be talking about. Now, the nation wasn't yet 100 years old, but it was in a lot of trouble. And the seeds that produced the Civil War were already blossoming. The once united nation was now clearly divided, and many wondered openly and publicly if the nation was going to survive. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the evil of slavery, and as a result, the nation was highly divided over the issue of slavery. States' rights and how far they should go was obviously included in that topic. Where is the limit for states' rights? And just on a side note, states' rights is why they seceded from the Union. That was the issue. In hindsight, we look at slavery as the number one issue. It was the number two issue. States' rights was the number one issue for the Civil War. But already in 1857, states were talking of secession. Everybody was consumed with the political and the social scenes. And there was a lot of concern already about a civil war should these states withdraw from the Union. And these concerns were not without merit. Just a year earlier, the radical abolitionist John Brown began his uprising against slavery, which led to a period where Kansas was known as Bleeding Kansas. That's where it happened.
Can I give you a side note?
Yes.
Bleeding Kansas. The guy that led the raids, Bleeding Kansas, what was his name? Is buried in Dover.
John Brown? No.
Kansas.
The other guy.
Yes.
Oh, really? He's buried here.
Yes, on 4th Street, and read his book. Well, not his book, but his synopsis of his book. What was his name? Most notorious Western
one of the
villains there was.
Yeah.
The guys that rode with him were railroad robbers.
Yeah.
Like
Jesse James?
Jesse James and his brother, and the younger brothers rode with him. And he went into Lawrence, Kansas, and burned it down and wiped it out.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I know who
He
you're talking.
sat there in a restaurant, and they made food for all of his guys. And And he hung people, and he did all kinds of things.
Yeah, that he was one of Quantrell's raiders.
Yes, Quantrell is his name.
Yes.
Buried in Dover.
Quantrell is buried in Ohio.
Buried in Dover. He's actually buried in 3 places, but
But they chop him up.
yeah, his skull sat in a refrigerator in Dover for I don't know how many years, and they buried it in Dover. But he's buried also in Kansas and also someplace else.
Yeah.
So William Quantrell.
Yep.
They definitely wanted to separate
Now that
him.
he was
He's an evil man.
he was one of the best cavalry commanders
Yes.
ever. From the military standpoint, he was one of the best. From his behavior, he was one of the worst. So yeah, he's quite an interesting guy.
Was that before or after this?
That's Civil War. That's Civil War era. So we're talking about before the Civil War. We're in the time leading up to the Civil War. And so we've got John Brown starts that. Now he was also killed as a result of his uprising and the murders he brought. He was hung. He was captured, prosecuted, and hung.
Harper's Ferry.
Yes,
John Brown was?
John Brown was, yeah.
Now, he was a black man. wasn't he?
No, he was a white man.
Was he a white?
He was a white man, and he was against slavery, and he wasn't going to wait anymore. And he
He raided the storehouse at Harper's Ferry,
yeah,
and he was caught by Custer, wasn't General Custer.
Captain Custer at that
Captain
time.
Custer. They captured him, killed most of his men, but they captured him and he hung him, and then the song came out. John Brown's body lies smoldering in the grave,
Oh, I
and
heard
was
that.
later.
John Brown's dead.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I
but
heard
that's-
it. Yeah, now it comes
But
back.
that song was later turned into Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory.
Yep.
of the Coming of the Lord.
Battle Hymn in the Republic.
Yes.
So, I love this conversation. It's good to see, that you're aware of the history that was leading up to this. Then we had the 1857 Supreme Court decision in March of 1857, the Dred Scott issue,
Yes.
where he was denied the right to sue because he was a slave. And at that time, they also declared the 1820 Missouri Compromise, which had restricted slavery north of the Louisiana Territory, exempting Missouri as unconstitutional. Now, this decision greatly increased the pro-slavery and anti-slavery movements.
What was it called again?
Dred Scott, Dred Scott.
The other one.
They declared the 1820 Missouri Compromise.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was called.
Yes. So America was divided to its core. People say it's divided now. This is divided on a whole nother level. And we do need to understand that when we're approaching God. Are we in a bad, divisive place? Yeah, undeniably. But we ain't seen nothing compared to what tensions were in 1857. So, one other thing was going on, and we've noticed this with every time before revival, is that not only do things seem to be falling apart on a political level, they're also falling apart on a religious level. And this is no different. Humanism was on the rise. Atheism, air quote, modern enlightenment, they rose to declare open war on God and religion in general. Humanism's open assault on Christianity led to a school of thought in theology known as modernism. And we find that in, if you want the Tübingen School of Higher Criticism. We find that today, higher critics, they deny the authorship of certain books. They deny the supernatural. They're modern day Sadducees. for lack of a better way to describe them. And so modernism began to arise during the 1850s, and it is going to produce a great deal of reactions to it. So in addition to the political confusion that's dominating the nation, the decade before the Civil War was also of religious confusion. Every fabric of society was under assault at once. Humanism's rise in influence gave rise to many cults, and many of which attracted notable followings. Spiritism, seances, and a general fascination with the occult gained social acceptance, and many became obsessed with the supernatural through other means than Jesus Christ. And so the church was losing on so many levels right now. The modern New Age movement's practices, many of them can be traced back to this period of time, because
Back to then.
yeah, back to the 1850s and the fascination with spiritism, because New Age movement is really an American version of polytheism, and it's an Americanized version, and so this branch, you can trace it back to that. One of the new cults that arose during this period was called the Millerites, and they were founded by William Miller. Now, William Miller was a hero of the War of 1812, and he was also a Baptist pastor, and he capitalized, on the growing anticipation of the second coming of the Lord. And he claimed that he had calculated the day of Christ's return to April of 1844. As the day came and went, it became known among Millerite circles as the Great Disappointment. Wonder why? One of the more prominent Millerite adherents was named Ellen G. White. And she claimed she had a vision that Jesus had in fact returned on that date, but it was a spiritual return, not a physical return. And so the Seventh-day Adventists were born. So we can see that, this is why we need to know history. We need to know where these movements come from.
That's right, we really do.
So it was around the same period another so-called religious prophet named Joseph Smith claimed to have discovered ancient tablets that could only be read by a pair of magic golden goggles. He gathered many around him in his teachings, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, was born. He claimed to have numerous prophetic experiences with an angel named Moroni.
Maloney? That was his last name.
And the supposed lost tribes of Israel had migrated to North America. He would die in a shootout with law enforcement in 1844. So maybe his...
2 times 44.
So his second in command, yep. There's always one in every class.
Sure is.
Here lies.
So he was shot, John Smith was shot?
No, we're long past John Smith. Yeah, we're on to Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon movement, and he died in a shootout with law enforcement.
Joseph Smith.
And so his second in command, Brigham Young, with his 55 wives, brought polygamy and other false beliefs into the mainstream American mind. Young would lead a great mass migration of Mormons along the Mormon Trail to the territory of Utah.
Yeah.
I seen the movie with him on that.
Well, so we got a lot going on, don't we, in these almost 60 years. Also, after the War of 1812 and the American victory, it brought a lot of prosperity again. and the young nation was acquiring land at an astonishing rate, sometimes peaceful, the Louisiana Purchase, sometimes not so peaceful, as we're aware of Western expansion. They moved more forcefully by war with Mexico, and the doctrine of manifest destiny dominated mainstream thought, which encouraged the continual Western expansion. So after the Mexican-American War, Texas and the Southwest came into the Union. Not long after, 1849, gold fever struck in California, and everybody started running west to strike it big. This was the before computers.com movement. And they all went.
I love the stories of the miners going to California looking for gold. I had a book that had all these stories in it. It was so interesting to me.
Oh, their personal life stories is fascinating.
They're very fascinating.
And, you know, so many of them obviously didn't find gold. They found poverty. But, boy, gold fever is incurable. So, again, from sea to shining sea was a reality. And the rapid expansion, unheard of prosperity, gold fever, led banks to over-speculate, and land speculators over-borrowed. We've seen this in our lifetime in the last 20 years. And it was the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company that spurred a stock market panic very similar to what we saw in 2008, 2009. They collapsed just like Washington Mutual, Lehman Brothers, and Freddie, Fannie Mac all collapsed. That's what they did. And unemployment skyrocketed overnight. 30,000 men suddenly were idle in the streets of New York City alone. What went up quickly did come down. Also, during the decade leading up to the Civil War, many European immigrants were arriving at Ellis Island and other large ports along the eastern seaboard, joining a mass rural migration to the urban centers to find work. And those who were doing well were moving to the suburbs, marking the beginning of what is now known as urban flight. This is the time period that it happened. And they were taking their incomes and their churches with them. So they were leaving the urban center to moving to the suburbs, and their churches were following their people. So the inner cities were being left to fend for themselves economically and worse, spiritually. On every front, it seemed that America was experiencing new enemies within and without. Rapid expansion founded so many boom towns and settlements without any gospel witness whatsoever.
Yes.
The overwhelming prosperity found many churches following their wealthy parishioners to the suburbs, and the poor were left behind in the cities. And there was a heavy drain of people who were leaving the churches for the cults and spiritism. There's another heavy drain where people leaving the church for modernism and atheism. And there's the economic crash, and people just didn't know where to turn. I think America was perhaps in the most dangerous place it has ever been, here in 1857. There was a Dutch Reformed church on the corner of Fulton Street in downtown New York City, located in what was just becoming known as Hell's Kitchen. This church was one of the many churches that was following its parishioners to the suburbs, following the urban flight. But the pastor saw the need to reach the swelling and hopeless population where the church used to be on Fulton Street. And so he convinced his board that the building should remain open in the form of a mission so that a gospel witness could still be present to serve the impoverished immigrants, the suddenly unemployed, the rural transplants. And they hired a layman whose name was Jeremiah Lamphere to oversee the mission. Now, Lamphere was a very creative young man, and he was full of innovative ideas. He was also reported to have had an outstanding singing voice. So, shortly after Lamphere took the job of the mission in 1857, he began walking the streets of inner city New York, wondering what he could do to bring the gospel to the people. He observed the economic fear dominating the remaining merchants. He saw the growing problem of mass unemployment, mass immigration, just exploding poverty. And he wondered, how am I going to reach the people? He questioned if he could actually make a difference in the growing mass of humanity. Well, it's an overwhelming task for one person, isn't it? As he continued to daily walk the streets, praying and wondering what could be done to bring effective evangelism to the people, he noticed that there was one common denominator in inner New York City, and it was this: between 12 noon and 1 o'clock, everything shut down. Everything closed for lunch between 12 and 1. And as he contemplated this one common denominator, he remembered that the Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening emerged out of people praying. He began to wonder if people would be willing to pray during their lunch hour. And so he was motivated by this spark of inspiration, and he quickly put his thoughts to action. He had 20,000 flyers printed up and began handing them throughout the neighborhoods, including Wall Street. Simple flyer invited people to come to prayer at the former Dutch Reformed Church on Monday from 12 to 1 p.m. on September 23rd, 1857. On the day of the first prayer meeting, Lamphere sat by himself alone for the first half hour. A total of 5 other people arrived during the last half hour. He'd handed out 20,000 flyers and 5 people responded. He was faced with an important decision. Would he declare the effort a failure and return to the drawing board? Or would he persist and see if he could gain traction over time? Remember what Zechariah says: "For who has despised the day of small things?" Other versions will translate it small beginnings. Who has despised the day of small things?
It's a great verse.
It is. In our culture today, we're obsessed. We think big is better. That's only true when it comes to horsepower. Other than that, no. Big is not always better. So here's what happened. Lamphere did not give up after the initial lack of success. He pressed on, and in doing so demonstrated that he understood not every beginning is a great beginning. In most cases, results are not instantaneous, but only come after periods of persistence. On the following Monday, 20 people attended the prayer meeting. Monday afterwards, 40. It was the third meeting that it was decided to pray each noon hour from Monday to Friday. Now, it was a revolutionary idea. Lay people praying. Now, we've been talking about every revival brings in a new truth that is actually in the Bible but has been left behind. Here, for the first time, lay people were praying. This was unheard of. Until this time, it was for the trained clergy only to pray. We still have a lot of strains of this idea today. How many times over the years of ministry I've heard, but I'm not a pastor. Like, so? Are you a Christian? But, oh, I don't want you to pray for me. I want the pastor to pray for me. Why? They're both praying to the same God. These are the strains of this old attitude that says, there's a difference between clergy and laity. That difference is a lie. You got to remember that. Anyway, until this time, this type of prayer had been reserved for clergy alone. It was improper. You were stepping out of line if you were not clergy and you would do this kind of prayer. It's a radical new step in the development of American Christian thought that lay people could move the hand of God by prayer. It was new, but it's also a logical progression. Up until this time, it had been clergy who prayed and clergy who called people to prayer. In previous revivals, it had been clergy who prayed for revival and travailed in prayer until revival came. Now, the ordinary man and woman are being invited to pray to their God and ask God to move on behalf of their nation. The businessman, the shopkeeper, the seamstress, the unemployed who were spending their lunch hour were now spending their lunch hour praying for revival to come to America. Cane Ridge had brought the transformational message that individuals were responsible for receiving Christ's work for themselves. Now, at a former Dutch Reformed church on Fulton Street in New York City, ordinary people were being told that they too could pray and God would answer. So following the decision to pray daily, every prayer meeting saw an exponential increase in people joining the prayer meetings until over 3,000 people were meeting daily in New York City to fast their lunch hour and pray at the Fulton Street Church. The newspapers heard of it. So let's take a look for a moment before we go on. Who was Jeremiah Lanphier? Like I say, I make these, so if you want to take a picture or if you want to go to the YouTube channel later, I don't have them up, but I'm more than willing to make these available. Otherwise, take pictures of these for your notes. I encourage it. But who was this man? He was the man who sparked this prayer movement. He was born in 1809 in New York, but he did not receive Christ until 1842 after he had a massive business failure. He was appointed in July to be a lay missionary, and it was in September that things started. And he would die in 1898 after leading over 11,000 prayer meetings during 36 years of ministry. He had a quote, and I've got it right here, and I love this quote. He said, "My business is to agitate the churches to pray, and then the work will go on."
That's a good one. I like that.
My business is to agitate the churches to pray. Amen. He had a powerful legacy. He demonstrated the power of prayer led by ordinary believers. He inspired prayer movements around the world. All American prayer movements that we have today, they all stem from this move of God that we're talking about. So, what started as one man walking up and down the streets of urban New York City, wondering how he could reach the struggling masses, had turned into a harvest where shortly before the Civil War, over 10,000 people were saved every week.
How many?
10,000. New York City entered a season of great spiritual harvest. Not only that, this prayer movement began to sweep the nation, both the North and the South. Both were praying. From the southern end, you've heard, I'm sure, his prayer books, E.M. Bounds.
Very well. I bought a lot of books of prayer.
Many of the northerners, they prayed. The southerners, they prayed. It all was from this. So the movement skipped the political divide. And before the first state succeeded in 1860, I believe it was South Carolina, almost every city in the states had a prayer meeting during lunch hour. Almost every city. So this movement of prayer, as I said earlier, was the absolute antithesis of the Cane Ridge. As wild and loud as Cane Ridge was in the Second Great Awakening, this was as orderly as you could get and quiet. Some people call this prayer movement the Third Great Awakening, by the way. So here's the rules. And again, if you want to take a picture, that'd probably be easier than writing it down, but encourage, take these, use these. That's why they're made. They're made to encourage you here.
Okay.
You're free to stand up and come up before I go over them. Come on up and you're free. That'll be $5. No. Yeah, take that picture. These are the rules. And I'm going to read them. Starts with extreme punctuality. You know, there's a school of thought that thinks that if things are highly structured, God can't move. This revival begs to differ. This is as structured as you're going to see. Number one, extreme punctuality. The meeting started at noon on the dot and were dismissed at 1 on the dot. Number two, it was layman-led. While clergy could attend, they could not take any form of leadership. Number three, prayer must begin within 10 minutes of opening. No one could speak on just any topic. This was to prevent the common temptation for someone to hijack with lots of words. That's a problem with prayer meetings, isn't it?
It is.
So he just shut her down from the get-go. By the way, so it was to shut down the temptation to talk about prayer requests for 45 minutes and pray for 5. He also instituted a 5-minute rule, which means no one who was speaking could talk for more than 5 minutes. There's a lot of wisdom in what this man was doing. He had 1 hour, and he wanted it to be efficient.
He was a wise man.
Number 4, here's how they work. The meeting opened with a song, a hymn, then an opening prayer, then a scripture. And then you went to prayer. No controversy was allowed. Leader had absolute authority. It was not a democracy. No self-promotion was allowed. No announcements were allowed or given. Number 6, no non-prayer activity could even be mentioned. No church could announce activities or services. Nothing but prayer. No preaching, no exhortation, nothing but prayer. Number 7, at promptly 12:55, the leader would stop the meeting, give the concluding prayer, and begin the dismissal. Number 8, emotional displays were not allowed. A person could not get all worked up and excited. You sat there quietly and prayed. Number 9, as a person entered, they could fill out a prayer request form and give it to an usher. These would be forwarded to the leader of the prayer meeting.
That's a great idea.
This is the way it worked. It's very efficient, isn't it?
You know, God's organized.
God's very organized. And he's not a God of order, of chaos, he's a God of order. That's actually in the Bible. So, here's how it would look. At the beginning of the meeting, the leader would read the prayer requests one at a time. Let me take this is an actual prayer request from one of the prayer meetings. A woman has a husband who is a drunkard and despises the things of God, and she asks for prayer for his soul. Who will pray? A person in the crowd would stand, all would bow their head and pray for this woman's husband. Prayers were only allowed to last 5 minutes. That way you could get as many as possible through. The leader would closely monitor the clock, and should the person praying exceed the time limit, they would politely but firmly be cut off. This process was repeated until 12:55, when the meeting was dismissed following the singing of a short song and a concluding prayer. This move of God was nothing at all like the Great Awakening or the Second Great Awakening. Polar opposite. The thing I love about teaching on this movement is that it shows us that God can move in the chaos, in the noise, and in the silence. God can move in the free form, and God can move in the highly structured. We tend to think God can't move if we. Well, I repeat myself, this is as structured as you're going to get. It's very efficient, but it's very structured. And yet New York City was seeing 10,000 people a week getting saved. Who says God can't move through structure? I've got empirical evidence that says otherwise. During this prayer movement, God added several things to the church that we don't think twice about. Let's take a look at the lasting results of this prayer revival. Again, before I go over it, I'd encourage you to take a picture of the infographic. Be easier than writing. And we see that there's quite some significant results that came out of this prayer revival. Number one is an estimated 1 million people were saved as a direct result of this prayer revival in the United States of America, in North America. That's about a similar number to the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening, which were significantly different. I emphasize that because, again, we want to break off our God only moves this way mentality. And we want to let God move how God moves. He says, behold, I do a new thing. He doesn't say, behold, I rinse and repeat. He's not bound by us, nor is he bound by our limitations. So, 1 million souls is nothing to sneeze at.
Well, it sure isn't.
Number 2, Sunday school was born. Did you know that before the prayer revival, there was no such thing as Sunday school? This is where people got burdened for the children. Why? Because they were praying. They were praying for people. And Sunday school was born. This is where Sunday school was born. In the grand scope of things, Sunday school is not a grand historical operation. It's actually a recent invention. Number 3, youth ministry was born. Again, nobody ever thought to reach youth before. Specifically, obviously, it's a logical extension of Sunday school. And number 4, missions to college campuses. Never had that before either. But suddenly, people's hearts were pierced and they decided that no longer should these young people on the college campuses be left exclusively to the opinions of their professors. And a lot of you've heard of these organizations that eventually came out of this, and they were formed in the 1900s, but Campus Crusade for Christ, Youth with a Mission, all of these, there's so many others that came out of the prayer movement. Because people were praying, they got a burden, then they were realized, look, laity are empowered for the first time. All of a sudden, laity are saying, hey, we can do something about what we see. We don't have to wait for the pastor to do it. That's sure freeing, isn't it? Gets a lot more people moving, too. Salvation Army is one of the movements that was formed during this period of time and really can trace a lot of its actions to the prayer revival. D.L. Moody was heavily influenced by the prayer revival, and his ministry became very well known, particularly his emphasis on the love of God. A radically different message than the angry God that had been preached previously. And then, just like the second Great Awakening, songwriting. It's interesting to me that people are inspired to create a new sound when God moves. When Cane Ridge and the second Great Awakening was happening, bluegrass came into the church. Early primitive bluegrass. Now, a lot of what people call historical hymns, this is actually the period that they were written. This is Fanny Crosby there I got a picture of, for instance. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. These hymns that we call the old hymns, they really were written, a lot of them coming out of this movement in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. And we'll be talking about the movement that followed the Civil War that really was a direct result of this prayer revival, because during the Civil War, the people kept praying on both sides of the conflict. The people kept praying. And there are reports, historical reports, through both the Union Army and the Confederate Army of revivals right before some of the worst battles. Antietam, for instance, Chancellorsville, there were revivals among the troops. And many of those young men who fell on those terrible battles, Antietam being the worst battle as for death toll in a single day that America's ever fought. And I hope we never beat it. But a lot of those young men on both sides received Christ shortly before that battle. And that's good to know. Gettysburg, there was prayer movements going before Gettysburg, which was the worst 3-day total battle, death toll. But again, God moved. One other interesting movement that came out of this was the YMCA and the YWCA. These both were birthed out of this prayer revival. And so many years later, there was a song written about them. Took 110 years or so, but we got the song. Anyway, this was a revolutionary move of God, wasn't it? So many things that we think is ordinary came out of this move of God. And I hope you can see, as we've been studying, it is a logical progression to the Second Great Awakening. Do you see how God is stair-stepping us up, right? And we're going to continue to see that. But we're also going to start to see the law become a thorn in revival's flesh. And that comes out of the intense structure of this move. Now, this was a Holy Spirit inspired structure for a very specific time and place. But we're going to start to see in the movements that were birthed out of this, coming out on the other side of the Civil War, where law and legalism start to be equated with